Welcome to the 10th episode of Curious and Inspired. I'm your host, Matt Vandrick. So today we're going to talk about a bunch of things. First, why everyone was so hyped about the Artemis trip to the moon, and I was completely over it. Then we'll talk about the changing landscape of music discovery and how your favorite new artist probably isn't human. The recent ADHD content trend and why it's so dangerous to get medical advice from TikTok. And finally, the third of the week where we're going to talk about all the things I've learned after 10 full episodes of the show, my views on staying motivated, and how anyone sharing themselves with the world can do the same. All that and more on this episode of Curious and Inspired. Let's get into it, shall we? So, a couple months ago, we went to the moon, and it was a big deal. People were very, very excited, and I think in general, I was too, I guess. During all the hype, I couldn't help but ask myself, why are we spending $1 billion to send people to the moon when there are people in this country who didn't eat today? And I did some social listening, and watching everybody's excitement, I kind of felt like I was alone in that thought. You know, everyone was very, very into the idea of sending people back to the moon. So just to catch us up, the NASA Artemis II crew touched down back on Earth, and it was the first crewed flight to the moon in over 50 years. The last time human beings were anywhere near the moon, bell bottoms were in style, and The Godfather had just hit theaters. So there's some people that may be watching the show that have no idea what I'm talking about, but it's okay. 4 astronauts this time, months of prep, billions of dollars, international coalitions, the whole shebang. And when I saw the headline, my first instinct was not excitement, actually. My first instinct was, for what? Because the math on its face is kind of hard to love. A single launch costs more than most American cities spend on food assistance in a year. The number of people in this country who cannot afford insulin is larger than the population of most of the countries these rockets are flying over. And I have spent a lot of my adult life pretty convinced that if you lined up all the things we could do with $1 billion, shooting humans into outer space would be pretty low on the list, if it was even there at all. But things changed. While I was researching, I came across the list of things that exist in our lives right now because of the space program. Memory foam, the stuff your mattress is made out of, came out of NASA research in the 1970s to make airline pilot seats safer in a crash. Wireless headsets were designed so astronauts could communicate hands-free in orbit. Those foil blankets you get wrapped in at the end of a marathon were developed as a lightweight insulator to protect spacecraft in temperature extremes. The Jaws of Life, the tool that firefighters use to extract people from crushed cars, uses a scaled-down version of the explosive charge designed to separate components on the space shuttle. So lives have been saved, quite literally, because of technology built for missions that had nothing to do with saving lives on American freeways. Ear thermometers, the ones your nurse can use on your kid, is a form of infrared astronomy. The same principle developed to measure the heat radiating off distant stars turned into the device that you use on your kid's ear. But then I sat with it longer and I started to realize the stuff is not actually the best part. The stuff happens to be a symptom, a byproduct of something much bigger. And the bigger thing is the thing that I personally had been overlooking all along. A lot of these things I mentioned, nobody at NASA set out to invent. The technology that trickled down to our daily lives was never the original goal. The goal was something much bigger and much less obviously useful at first. Figuring out how to keep human beings alive in a place they were not designed to exist opened up doors for new inventions that the culture benefits from. And the accidental benefits turned out to be substantial enough that they now have become commonplace in society. There's a sociologist named Robert K. Merton who had a term for this, serendipitous discovery. His argument that he built up over a couple decades was that some of the most durable improvements in human life come from research that was aimed at a completely different question. You try to solve something far away, and on the way to not quite solving it, you accidentally invent something that helps you solve something completely different. That pattern is a valuable byproduct of a system rooted in curiosity. The relationship between ambition and benefit is almost never direct. The $1 billion we spent on Artemis is not a trade against insulin. It's a trade against the conditions under which unexpected good happens. A culture that stops reaching stops producing the side effects that we all live inside and benefit from. If we don't reach for the newest and biggest frontiers, we lose out on possibilities like new inventions. We also lose the 14-year-old who sees the astronaut on TV and decides to become the engineer who designs the next generation of prosthetics. We lose the conditions, and the conditions of curiosity are the thing that are most important. I was measuring space travel against the problems that it wasn't really intending to solve. What I wasn't measuring was the cost of what happens to a species that stops being willing to dream at scale, to stop finding inspiration in discovering new frontiers. I had been mistakenly thinking that we should only invest in what directly solves the most visible problems. But a culture that can only see what is in front of it is a culture that over time gets smaller and more tunnel visioned and more constrained. In many ways, the Artemis voyage reminded me that there's a kind of inspirational nourishment that we collectively receive from knowing that the impossible is still possible. A reason to tell our kids that the world is bigger than what they can see outside the window. And that maybe is the answer to the question that I walked in with. Why are we spending so much money to go to the moon when there are people who didn't eat today? Well, because the same muscle that sends humans to the moon is a muscle that we can flex to imagine a world that nobody has to go hungry. If we lose one, we start to lose the other. You cannot build a society that has the ambition to end hunger if you are not building one that also has the ambition to go to space. The rocket is evidence that a culture is still willing to take on problems it does not yet know how to fully solve. And I think that there's inspiration to be found in that. And I'm not saying this to let anybody off the hook. I still think government funds should be better used to support people, but perhaps that it's its own moral failure and not directly tied to spending money on rocket ships. So I'm updating my position, not fully abandoning it, but updating how I hold it. And the question I'm actually leaving with now is not should we have gone to the moon? It's more like, what have I been framing as an either or when it really was a both and? And then I turn that on you. What imagination have you been calling impractical that was actually the thing keeping the rest of the work alive? I'm going to sit with that a while. And I want you to as well. If you land on anything meaningful, I'd love to hear about it. Shoot me a DM or leave me a comment. Next. So I'm curious, how do you discover new music today? Years ago, radio and MTV were the leaders. Now, streaming platforms and social media clips are the main conduits. All of that is changing, and I want to talk about two stories from this year and put them next to each other. First, a digital marketing firm called Chaotic Good runs networks of social media accounts that look like regular fans. And these fake accounts post clips of their clients' music designed to push that music into TikTok's recommendation algorithm. Popular rock band Geese and a handful of other bands are on this agency's client list. So Geese was critically acclaimed by the traditional music press before any of this news came out. Nobody can prove how much Chaotic Good's activity actually mattered to their initial rise. And technically, it's not streaming fraud. It's closer to algorithmic public relations. Real clips and performances distributed through networks of accounts designed to look organic. So the platform would surface the music to humans who might genuinely love it. The next story is a little bit stranger. Earlier this year, an artist called Sienna appeared on Spotify. No social media to speak of. No live performance or interviews, but 3 million monthly Spotify listeners. 3 songs on the viral 50 USA chart. Selena Gomez even used one of her tracks in an Instagram post about the Golden Globes. But the thing is, Sienna Rose is not a person. Deezer, a French music streaming service, confirmed her music is all AI generated. She's uploaded 45 songs and 10 albums in a 3-month span, a release pace that no actual human could probably sustain. When Sienna Rose first appeared, the AI-generated image representing her was a white, redheaded singer-songwriter. Then it turned into a brunette. And then once the R&B music started outperforming the other styles, she became a black R&B singer, and the other 2 versions of Sienna Rose got quietly deleted, stricken from the record. So an algorithm tried 3 different racial and genre configurations of a fake artist, watched which one the market responded to the most, and then decided to keep that one. A machine decided through A/B testing that presenting as a black woman making R&B was the commercial costume that was the most lucrative. And then 3 million people a month are now listening. So put these 2 stories next to each other and you can see the spectrum that we're now operating in when it comes to music discovery. On one hand, you got real human artists using the algorithm to market and amplify their work. And on the other end, you have algorithms producing the artist itself. And us as the audience are taking them both in. Somewhere in the middle is a huge gray area that we've not quite figured out yet. Because on one hand, we have tons of respect for the artist and the craft of music making. But on the other hand, if the listener is still moved by the work, does it matter? I say it does, but to the listener, obviously it doesn't, because a lot of people didn't even know that Sienna wasn't real. A song is a song, and if it moves you, it moves you. And whatever made it is kind of a secondary question, one would think. The harder question, the one that underlies both Geese and Sienna, is a little bit different. I think there's even a bigger question here. Are we actually discovering anything anymore? Or is discovery itself now just a service that gets sold to you? Because the truth is, every industry has always had marketing. You walk into a grocery store and you can see the arrangement of products on the shelves. Brands negotiate those placements. Online, it's harder to tell the difference, because when you're scrolling through your feed, everything kind of feels organic. You open up Spotify or TikTok, you see something that you've never heard that's being recommended to you, and you think, oh, wow, like this is cool. And the entire emotional reward of that moment is built on the assumption that it wasn't really put there on purpose. What Chaotic Good is selling, when you really get to the core of it, is not fake fans. It's the simulation of that stumble, the simulation of serendipity, the illusion that you're casually scrolling TikTok and then this song just happened to be on your feed. What Sienna Rose's backers are selling is something even further down the same road. A performer whose race, genre, and identity were optimized by an algorithm before you even heard the first note. We've talked before about the notion of people appropriating real life talent for their own benefit. And when it comes to R&B, Black women in particular should not have to be the subject of an experiment. If you think about the backbone of a genre that was built over the past, 70 some odd years, the industry has historically undercredited and underpaid those artists. And now an algorithm is occupying that slot without having a single real artist in the room. Because the machine noticed that presenting as a Black woman in R&B is what makes the dollars. And that's appropriation at a speed and scale that we haven't really quantified yet. So here's where I am. I'm not saying to throw out all the streaming services, this is the way of the world. I'm also not saying to stop loving your favorite musical artists. And I'm also not saying that you shouldn't listen to artists like Sienna Rose either if their music actually moves you. The human response to art is its own legitimate and quite personal thing. What I am saying is we are losing the ability to tell whether something found us or was built for us and recommended heavily. It kind of changes what discovery means. It kind of changes the entire emotional texture of what it means to truly be a fan of something. Because one, is that really your taste, or was it just heavily recommended to you? And then further, if there's no real artist behind the music, what exactly do you latch onto? What are you actually connecting with? In a world where authenticity itself is now a product and algorithms can, put on whatever mask it wants to make a couple dollars, what becomes of the things we truly love? And how do we tell which of them were ours to find and which were conveniently placed in the aisle we were already walking down? Next, what happens to a culture that has more access to information than ever before and less ability than ever to tell what's true? And more importantly, why the healthcare sector is the most at risk. So a team of researchers at the University of British Columbia pulled the top 100 TikTok videos tagged with the hashtag ADHD that together had reached over 500 million views. The research team had 2 clinical psychologists evaluate every claim made in the videos against the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. That's the actual document that mental health professionals use to diagnose ADHD. What they found was that fewer than half the claims being made about ADHD aligned with the clinical definition of the condition. So a significant chunk of what was being called ADHD on TikTok, in the researchers' words, were really just normal human experience being pathologized and repackaged. None of the creators were licensed psychologists, psychiatrists, or medical doctors. Only about 20% of them even mentioned their credentials. And those were generally like coach, consultant, and content creator. And more than half of the creators were selling something, a workbook, a product, a coaching service, or a supplement. And they were selling these things in the same video where they were describing the symptoms that would make you want to purchase their solution. There's a whole generation of young people who grew up being told to go look it up. I'm being one of them. And those folks who are being told to go look it up are now looking it up on TikTok. And if this was like an isolated incident, we could probably say, well, yeah, TikTok is TikTok. Obviously you're not supposed to get your information from there. Tell them to go look elsewhere. But there was a second study published this April in BMJ Open. Researchers at the Harbor UCLA Medical Center working with colleagues in Canada and the UK, tested 5 of the most widely used chatbots on 250 medical and health-related questions across cancer, vaccines, stem cells, nutrition, and athletic performance. The kinds of questions any of us might ask at 2 a.m. when something doesn't feel quite right and we don't really want to make a doctor's appointment. About half of the answers, 49.6 actually, were rated as problematic. Nearly 20% were highly problematic, meaning the response could plausibly lead someone to ineffective treatment or to actual harm if followed without professional guidance. The chatbots perform best on vaccines and cancer. They perform worst on nutrition, stem cells, and athletic performance, which is not coincidentally exactly the type of information that people are most likely to want to fix themselves at home. Responses were consistently conveyed with confidence and certainty with very few disclaimers. So they are wrong half the time, but they are confident every time. It gets worse. When the researchers asked the chatbots to produce scientific references, like actual studies underneath their claims, not a single chatbot produced a fully accurate reference list. The average completeness score was around 40%. Citations were regularly just made up out of thin air, formatted to look like real journals, completely fabricated. So the AI wasn't just giving wrong answers, it was inventing the sources that would appear to support those wrong answers. Now, put those 2 studies next to each other. A generation learning the contours of their own mental health from a platform where fewer than half the claims align with clinical reality, and then the tool that many of them are turning to next, these chatbots, is wrong half the time. That is a hall of mirrors that we are trying to learn ourselves inside of. The philosopher Harry Frankfurt wrote a book almost 2 decades ago called On Bullshit. His argument, to be very clear, was that bullshit is different from flat out lying. A liar knows the truth and is actively working against it. A bullshitter doesn't care whether what they're saying is true or false. The bullshitter cares only about the effect of what they're saying, the persuasiveness, the performance. What Frankfurt called bullshit, the AI industry now calls hallucination. So we softened the language, but the impact is the same. Because a chatbot is not lying to you necessarily or actively working against the truth, or so we hope. It might be doing something even worse because it really doesn't have any stake in the truth at all. It's generating text that statistically resembles what a true answer would sound like. And it's doing so with tone, certainty, and authority that no human who actually knew the answer would ever use. The thing about real doctors and therapists and experts is the fact that they typically tend to hedge what they tell you. The first words out of their mouth is usually in most situations, or it depends, or I'm not sure, let me look that up, which isn't a failure of knowledge, it's the proper execution of it. That's what knowledge is supposed to sound like. It's confident, but it leaves room for caveats. The tools we are building and the content we are feeding ourselves are moving in the exact opposite direction. They're optimized for certainty because certainty gets more usage. Uncertainty doesn't trend. A video that says you might have ADHD if you sometimes lose your keys perform better than a video that says, here's the clinical definition, which has all these different components, and the diagnosis requires an actual trained professional. That's not going to get as many clicks. So I do want to be careful here because I'm not anti-AI, as you know. I think AI platforms in many contexts are genuinely useful. But the use case where they fail hardest is also the use case where they seem on the surface to be most useful. So the advice I would give, and what I'm actually trying to take myself, is remember to get second opinions on everything. Second opinions are still necessary, especially when it comes to anything medical. Talk to a real person who has been trained and has skin in the game if something happens to you. And when you're trying to understand something important about yourself, your body, your mind, anything that needs a diagnosis, be suspicious of anything that sounds too certain. The health world, in almost every circumstance, is more nuanced than a chatbot can tell you and less tidy than a 90-second TikTok wants it to be. So the question is, if the tools we use to understand ourselves are wrong some of the time, but confident every time, what happens to our collective ability to trust them? I don't know. But the first step is being aware of it and acknowledging it head on. Make sure that you yourself are remaining objective and discerning when it comes to the conversations that you're having with AI, especially when your health is involved. All right. And now the thought of the week. This is the 10th episode of Curious and Inspired. 10, which honestly doesn't sound like a lot, but when you're the one who has to sit in front of a camera and tell a coherent story on a regular cadence, 10 is a number with some weight to it, and I'm going to take credit for that. 10 is when you can no longer call it just a phase, right? Like, it's when the show either starts to be something or it doesn't. And so I want to use this episode to do something a little bit different with my thought of the week. We're not going to be breaking down any big topics. We're not going to analyze something, very cerebral or the latest trend. But I do want to talk to you honestly about what I've learned from 10 episodes of asking questions out loud in public and on purpose. Because when I started this podcast, I started it to ask questions. That was the whole premise. I had come to believe that the loudest voices on the internet had mostly stopped asking anything and had started simply announcing conclusions. And I wanted to do something different. I wanted to hold space for us to ask the questions that I felt weren't being asked. And I also wanted to invite other people like you all to do the same alongside me. That was the thesis. And in a lot of ways, it still is the thesis. But what I didn't expect was when we hit record on episode 1, was that asking itself was going to teach me more than I was going to teach anybody else. And the things that asking taught me are the things I couldn't really have read in a book. So let's get into them. The first thing I learned is that people will disagree with you about things you thought were obvious. And I don't mean disagreements that land as kind of like reasonable pushback. I've had plenty of those and I'm grateful for those. Some of the smartest engagements on this show have come from people who watched the video, thought about it a little bit harder than I did, and came back with something I genuinely had not considered. That is the dream. And that's what I want from the show. That's what I want from interacting with you guys. What I did not expect was the category of disagreement where someone is not actually responding to what you said. They're responding to a version of what you said that they assembled themselves in their own head out of a single word or two that they cherry picked out of your entire premise. And that to me is a completely different animal. And there's more of them than I thought. You can say one thing quite clearly on camera, and 100 people will hear 100 different things. And some of them will be angry at you for things that you didn't actually say. And that is the part that I, am learning to deal with. I didn't really know that fully when I started, but I definitely know it now. The second thing I learned, and it's kind of related, is that people don't listen the way I thought that they listened. I used to structure an argument the way I would structure it if I were talking to a friend. A little bit of setup, a little bit of context, and we were rolling. And I realized about 5 episodes in that people do not know what I mean unless I tell them exactly what I mean. Sometimes nuance gets lost in these videos. Nuance gets lost on the internet. And so I have to break things down in very, very small chunks to make sure that people are getting out of it what I want them to get out of it. And so I've been learning to break things down a little more, take the big thought and cut it into smaller thoughts. And then just when you think they're in small enough thoughts, you should probably cut them down again and then string them all together. And then also, when you're cutting them into those bite-sized pieces, you need to make sure that they actually taste good going down. Not all messages go down easy for everybody. No matter how you think you're delivering it, it may not be good to some folks. But the truth is, people have a lot going on. The audience is, you guys are scrolling through tons of things all day long. And so if I pop up and I have my little 90 seconds with you on an Instagram reel, then, I kind of got to make sure you get something out of it in a very small window of time. And in that window of time, you may not have time to interpret what it is I'm trying to say. And so that's my job, not your job. If I want someone to arrive at a conclusion with me, I have to actually walk them there one step at a time and then make sure nobody trips along the way. And then when it comes to disagreements, I'm fine with you disagreeing with me once you fully understand what I'm saying. I have no interest in an audience that agrees with me all the time. What I want is an audience that hears me and then chooses what to do with what it is that they heard. I am not trying to protect myself against disagreement. I'm trying to protect us both from misunderstanding each other. And I've learned in doing the show that the only person that can protect that is me, by being more precise and more clear about the things that I say. The third thing I learned is that this is slow. I want to say that again. And a lot of y'all probably already know this, maybe especially people that have been doing this for longer. This is a very slow burn. So when you start a show, especially if you've had success in other corners of your life, it's easy to kind of carry this expectation that the audience is just going to like pick it up. You know, like I'm going to make this show and then I'm going to put it out and then I'm going to have tons of viewers and everybody's going to be excited. And, that's not the way it works. The algorithm will notice, and some people will notice, and you'll get some likes and some shares and things like that. But it takes a while for the machine to kick in, for the algorithm to kick in. And there's really no telling when, how, or why it does. And audience growth is slow. People trusting you is slow. 10 episodes is not a finish line by any means. It's barely a warm-up as far as I'm concerned. I mean, even Mr. Beast, super acclaimed YouTube superstar, said something along the lines of like, don't even look at your metrics till about 100 videos in. And the truth is, if I were doing this to chase a particular metric on a certain timeline, I probably would have quit already. The reason I have not quit, and the reason why I'm not going to, is because I enjoy it. I enjoy the work. I enjoy asking these questions, and I enjoy having dialogue with you all. A lot of the things that I talk about on here, I would probably be asking anyway. Like, even if I wasn't putting it on a show, these are things that I would be thinking about. And so I think that is what also makes it a little bit easier. And I kind of want to give that to you guys as well. If the reason you're doing this or anything is because you want the reward, you will quit. Because the reward is not coming tomorrow. If the reason you're doing it is because you love what you're doing, and you're connected to what you're doing, and you're connected to the reasons why you're doing it, then it'll be easier to continue. Everybody who has ever made something worthwhile over a long time understands that notion. And the only way to learn it is to live through the part where the reward isn't really there yet, which, by the way, is the majority of the time. The fourth thing I learned is that the algorithm is not your friend. It's not your enemy, but it's not your friend either. The algorithm is like a two-faced acquaintance. It's a frenemy. It will sometimes show your work to people who needed to see it. It'll sometimes root for you. And it'll sometimes hide your work from people who were actually looking for it. It'll have strong opinions about what counts as acceptable content. And those opinions will never be the same from week to week. And they'll never fully be explained to you. What I have noticed, though, specifically, is that the perspectives I share that skew a little bit political, those tend to get amplified by humans, but throttled by the algorithms. I have had reels boosted organically by real people sharing them, and they have gone really far, sometimes in the millions of views. And I've had those same high-performing reels be blocked by paid promotion because they were, quote, too political or had political undertones, which is basically another way of saying the platform gets to decide which undertones are acceptable and which ones are not. And you don't have a say in that. Which then brings me to the fifth thing, and it's probably the most practical of all of them. You got to own your platform. I cannot say this loudly enough. Whatever you're building, if you are building it entirely on rented land, you are one algorithm update from being invisible. I built CuriousInspired.com as a hub for all content because I'm investing in systems that I control rather than systems I rent. Because last thing you want is the line to your audience to be at the whims and wishes of someone else. You should be able to speak directly to your own audience, and relying on these platforms is risky and unpredictable. The sixth thing is all about authenticity. And I know that word is very, very overused at this point. So much so that it's kind of lost its meaning, but it still matters. Everybody's authentic. Every brand is authentic. Every AI-generated influencer is described by the company that made it as authentic. But when I say authenticity, I want to be clear about what that actually means. I don't mean, oversharing or being super raw and unfiltered for the sake of, but I do mean leaning into the things that make you one of one. There's exactly one of you on the planet with exactly your combination of experiences, traumas, pattern matching, all the things, education, you name it. And if you try to make content by hiding any of that, even one aspect of that, if you hide any of it, that is what puts you at risk for sounding like everyone else. The only thing that works over time is the stuff that only you can make. We've talked about this on other episodes. That is the part of you that will find an audience, and also the part of you that nobody else can copy, at least not outright. And the noisier the internet gets, the more valuable that part of you becomes. And so find the part of you that is one of one and put that in front of the camera. Last but not least, build systems and build a team that you can trust. There is no way that I could do all of this on my own, and I am forever grateful to the folks that without them, this show, as you know it, would not be possible. So shout out to Yasmin, my super dope producer who keeps me on my toes, and Scott, the studio director, and his team of editors that keep me looking good, sounding good, all Hollywood and well lit and shit. It matters. It all matters. Quality production is priceless. So shout to the team. I would not be here without y'all. And of course, you, all the folks that have been listening, watching, commenting, sharing. It really does mean the world to me. This is my little show that could, and we're going to continue going 10 episodes in. To anyone building their own thing, a show, an app, a practice, a community, a business, anything where you're putting your voice, your ideas out into the world and wanting to see what comes back, I want you to keep going. It is going to be slow. You are going to feel like you are shouting into the abyss. People won't always see your full vision at first either. But that's why it's your vision. What you make with the vision is what will impact the people, not the vision itself. The vision is yours to create something out of. So keep going. And here we are, 10 episodes down, many, many more to come. I know what I'm doing now in a way that I didn't when I started. And we'll see what happens when we get to episode 20. I'm pretty sure I'll have a brand new batch of things that I have continued to learn. Much, much more is absolutely on the way. As always, stay curious, stay inspired. All right. Ask Matt, how do you decide which stories are worth amplifying on your platform? So I do a lot of social listening. I feel like I'm constantly scrolling through Threads, Instagram, TikTok, even just the regular news cycle. Wherever the conversation is happening, I'm paying attention to it. And I'm paying attention not only to the story, but also what people are saying about the story, the temperature of reaction, the kind of like the societal pulse of what is surrounding that news. I pay attention to as well, and what people are carrying into the next conversation. And if there's something that's taken up a lot of space, there's usually a reason. And so I pay more attention to it. But I found that there's always a piece of the story that people aren't really talking about or paying attention to out loud yet. And that's where I try to find where my sweet spot is. That's where I try to find my angle. And then sometimes that's super straightforward. Like it's a story that already has a very obvious tie to the topics that I talk about. Anything that has tech value is usually good fodder for me. Other times, sometimes I'll just see something that somebody else said in passing or like a reaction that someone had. And then I'll realize I'm reading it very, very differently than most of the takes that I'm seeing. And that's usually when I know I got something good. When I disagree with the majority. When I notice that the crowd is looking in one direction and there's a whole other angle that nobody is talking about, but that I feel is very, very valuable. That's when I feel like I've almost struck gold and I have to talk about it with you guys. But before anything gets on the show, I do run it through like a few questions. Is this something somewhat adjacent to technology? Because that's always going to be the core. That's my lane. Does it have an implication that's going to affect us? And not in like an abstract kind of way, but in like a, how does this change your life in ways that I want you to understand kind of way? And when something new comes up and everybody jumps on it, I try to ask that question underneath. Why are we doing this? What good is it actually doing? Is there harm being done that no one's talking about? What about this is being said loudly and what is not being said at all? Are there things about this that could change how people engage with it if they were to know more information about it? That's really it. It's alternative thinking. My job, the thing that I'm trying to get better at actually every week, every time I do the show, is to look at the thing everybody's reacting to and ask what's underneath that reaction. And if I can find something there that's truly useful, then we'll talk about it. And if not, then we won't. All right, that is the show. Ladies and gentlemen, episode 10 is in the books. We did it. It's much, much more to come. I'm very excited. And I want you all to continue joining me. So here we go. Much, much more to come. Brand new episodes on the way. Stay tuned for episode 11 coming next time. But until then, I will see you next time. As always, stay curious, stay inspired. Y'all be good. Peace. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And stay tuned for new episodes Thursdays bi-weekly at 8 p.m. Connect more with me at CuriousInspired.com and at CuriousInspired on all socials. Thanks for watching. As always, stay curious, stay inspired. Y'all be good. Peace.